I discovered the truth on a Thursday afternoon in autumn when the solicitor's letter arrived bearing news that should have destroyed me, but instead set me free. The paper trembled in my hands not from fear, but from the sudden crystalline understanding of how thoroughly I had been erased. My brother Edward had mortgaged the last of our mother's property. The house in which I sat, the chair beneath me, the very dress upon my body, all of it balanced on the edge of his latest wager. 23 years I had managed our household, with nothing but an allowance so modest it barely covered my simplest needs. While he spent a fortune, I had preserved, protected, and mourned. The solicitor's handwriting was apologetic but precise. The estate was encumbered beyond recovery. Edward's debts had consumed everything our grandfather built, everything our father died protecting, and I, Eleanor Ashford, age 34, educated, capable, and invisible, had been left to discover this through a stranger's careful script rather than from my own brother's lips. I sat in the morning room as the October light filtered through lace curtains, casting shadows that looked like prison bars across the Turkish carpet. The house was silent, except for the clock marking seconds that suddenly mattered. Somewhere in London, Edward was at his club, laughing over cards, ordering another bottle of claret on credit he could not honor. He had not been home in 6 weeks. He did not know I knew. That was his first mistake. For the silence that followed my discovery was not the silence of defeat. It was the silence of a mechanism beginning to turn, a lock sliding open, a woman who had spent her entire life learning the architecture of restraint finally understanding that the same rules which had confined her could become her instruments. I grew up in this house, the younger child and only daughter. From the beginning, I understood my place in the order of inheritance and affection. Edward was 4 years my senior, fair and charming, prone to excess even as a boy. I was serious, dark-haired, precise. Father died when I was 16, his last words not to me but about me. Eleanor will manage, she always does. It was intended as praise. I learned to hear it as prophecy. Mother lived another 8 years, growing frailer and more dependent, while Edward studied at Cambridge, traveled to the continent, and cultivated expensive tastes among men who had twice his fortune. I managed the household accounts, supervised the staff, ensured that everything ran as it should. I wrote Edward's letters to Mother when he forgot. I learned to forge his signature on birthday cards. I became so efficient at maintaining the illusion of his attention that even I sometimes forgot I was performing. When Mother died, I discovered she had left me a small independence, £300 a year from a trust our grandmother had established. It was enough for survival, but not autonomy. The house, the land, the London property, the investments, all went to Edward, as law and custom demanded. I remained in the family home because I had nowhere else to go, and because someone needed to manage what he could not be bothered to tend. He would arrive every few months, flushed with expensive wine and bad decisions, bringing friends who tracked mud across carpets and treated me like an extension of the furniture. They would stay a week or a fortnight, shooting birds, playing billiards, leaving me to instruct cook on preparing elaborate meals I was not invited to share. Then they would leave again, and I would discover new debts, new obligations, new pieces of our heritage sacrificed to his version of gentlemanly living. I said nothing. What woman in my position could say anything? I wrote careful letters to creditors, negotiated payment plans, sold small items that would not be missed. I told myself I was protecting Mother's memory, preserving what I could. I told myself that Edward was simply young, that he would mature, that surely he understood the value of what he risked. I told myself these things until that October afternoon when I learned he had known for at least 2 years that the estate was failing and had chosen not to tell me. While I mended curtains and diluted the household wine to make it last, he had mortgaged our future to fund his present. While I dismissed servants to reduce expenses, he was buying hunters he would ride once before losing interest. While I wore mourning for Mother until the fabric grew thin, he was being measured for his 5th new coat of the season. The letter from the solicitor included details that revealed the scope of his deception. Notes coming due, properties leveraged beyond their value, promises made to men whose patience had limits. The collapse would come before spring. When it did, I would have nothing. My £300 a year would evaporate with everything else. I would become one of those pitiful women one encounters in boarding houses, teaching manners to merchants' daughters or serving as a companion to wealthy invalids, unless I acted first. I sat with that understanding as the afternoon light faded. I did not cry. I had cried too often in this house, alone in rooms that smelled of dust and denial. Instead, I felt something settle into place inside me, like a bone healing after a break. stronger at the fault line than it had been before. I would need information, I would need allies, I would need perfect timing. Most of all, I would need what Victorian society gave women so grudgingly but so absolutely: the power of reputation. Edward's standing in society rested on the illusion of honor, solvency, and breeding. He was invited everywhere because men believed he was one of them, an eldest son, a landowner, a gentleman of fortune. His charm greased every door. His connections forgave every excess. Society had decided who he was, and he had not troubled to correct them. But I knew what he truly was, and I knew every detail of his decline because I had been the one cleaning up behind him for 8 years. I began that very evening. I took a lamp to Father's study, which Edward never entered, and opened the locked drawer where I had been keeping careful records. Every gambling debt, every unpaid tailor's bill, every promissory note I had found in his coat pockets when instructing the maids on mending. I had kept them all, telling myself I was simply being thorough, being organized, being the kind of woman who noticed things. Now I saw them for what they were: evidence. I spent 3 days cataloging everything, organizing it chronologically and by category: gambling debts to named individuals, money borrowed against expectations of inheritance, promises made to shopkeepers who would never be paid. The portrait that emerged was not of a man with poor judgment, but of a man who had systematically defrauded everyone who trusted him. Then I turned to correspondence. Edward maintained his social standing through careful performance, but he was lazy about details. He left letters lying about, forgot to burn sensitive communications, never thought to wonder what became of the paper trail of his life. I had access to everything because he had never considered that his spinster sister might be anything other than a benign custodian of domestic trivia. I learned that he owed the Honorable George Pemberton £4,000 from a single night's play, that he had signed promissory notes to 3 different moneylenders using the same collateral, that he had told Miss Caroline Fletcher's father he possessed an unencumbered income of $8,000 a year when applying for her hand, a courtship that had failed when someone somehow let slip the truth of his circumstances. This last discovery was illuminating. Someone had warned the Fletchers off. Someone already questioned Edward's finances. I needed to know who. I put on my mourning bonnet and called on Mrs. Margaret Thornton, the closest thing I had to a friend. She was 52, widowed, sharp-minded, and possessed of the one thing I lacked: social mobility. Her drawing room was a crossroads of information, her weekly teas attended by women of influence and awareness. "Eleanor," she said when I was shown into her parlor, her expression sharpening, "you look different." "Do I?" I set down my teacup carefully. "I have been going through Father's papers. It makes one contemplative." Margaret studied me with the attention of a woman who had survived her own battles. "Your brother is in town." "Yes." "He was seen at Lady Ashford's ball last week, making promises about a shooting party in December." "That will not happen." I said it quietly, simply, the truth rather than a prediction. Margaret's pause was meaningful. "I see." "I wonder," I continued, "if you might tell me who it was that warned the Fletchers about Edward's circumstances last year. I would like to thank them for their discretion." A smile touched Margaret's lips. "That was my daughter Catherine. She heard something from the Pemberton boy. Idle talk at a dinner party. She thought Caroline deserved to know before committing herself." Catherine showed excellent judgment. "She did." Margaret refilled my teacup. "Eleanor, what are you planning?" I met her eyes. "To ensure that everyone shows such excellent judgment going forward." She was quiet for a long moment. Then she said, "The Winterbourne Ball is in 3 weeks. It is the event of the season. Everyone will attend who matters, including your brother, I should think, if he maintains the pretense that long." "Will it be well attended?" "My dear, the Duke himself is expected. It will be remembered for years." She paused. "Whatever is said there will be repeated in every drawing room in England within a fortnight." "Then I shall need an invitation." "You shall have one." Margaret reached across and touched my hand. "I should have done more for you long before now." "You are doing exactly enough now." Over the following weeks, I moved like a woman in a cathedral, quiet, purposeful, building toward something that would endure. I continued my correspondence with Edward's creditors, but now I did not soothe or defer. I asked precise questions. I established exact figures. I collected statements and secured promises that when the time came, certain individuals would be willing to speak truth to society. I called on 5 women whose sons, brothers, or husbands had been drawn into Edward's circle. I did not gossip. I simply mentioned, in passing, that I was concerned about his associates, that I feared he was being led astray by men of poor character. I planted the seeds of doubt while appearing to defend him, knowing that nothing spreads faster than a suspicion one feels noble for sharing. I learned which journalists attended which social events. I discovered that the Honorable George Pemberton's uncle wrote a column for a society newspaper under a pseudonym everyone knew. I learned that Lord Winterbourne himself was deeply opposed to gambling, having lost a nephew to the vice. Every detail mattered. Every connection was a thread I could pull. Edward came home once during those weeks, staying 2 days before returning to London. He was nervous, distracted. Money troubles were clearly pressing on him. He asked me, with the casual entitlement of someone who has never been refused, whether I might advance him £100 against household expenses. "I am sorry, Edward," I said, looking up from my sewing. "But the household accounts are stretched thin as it is. Perhaps you might economize in town." He stared at me as if I had spoken in a foreign language. Then he laughed, kissed my forehead, and left. He took Mother's pearl earrings from her dressing table on his way out. He thought I would not notice. I noticed everything. The night of the Winterbourne ball, I wore Mother's black silk gown, altered to fit me. I had not attended a society event since her funeral. My appearance, I knew, would itself be a statement. The grieving sister, the dutiful daughter, emerging from seclusion. Margaret had arranged everything beautifully. I would arrive with her family, which lent me consequence. I would be seated near the Duke's party, which lent me visibility. And Edward, who had not expected me to attend, would be there as well. I saw him across the ballroom as I entered. He was laughing, a champagne glass in hand, surrounded by young men who treated their inheritance as if it were infinite. He did not see me. He had never truly seen me. The evening unfolded with the precision of a mechanism I had wound over weeks of preparation. I danced once with Margaret's son, which established my presence. I spoke briefly with Lady Winterbourne about Mother, which reminded everyone of my family's legitimate standing. And I waited. The Honorable George Pemberton arrived late, his expression already dark. He went directly to Edward. I could not hear their conversation, but I saw Edward's face change, saw him glance toward the exit, saw his mask of charm falter. That was when Margaret's daughter, Catherine, bless her calculated timing, approached Lady Ashford, no relation to me despite the name, and mentioned in a voice pitched to Carrie that she had heard the most distressing news about poor Mr. Edward Ashford's financial difficulties. Was it true he had mortgaged his entire estate? How dreadful for his sister. The words spread like spilled wine, staining everything they touched. I watched conversation then shift, saw heads turn toward Edward, watched the slow dawn of understanding move through the ballroom. This was not one woman's gossip. This was confirmation of suspicions many had harbored, given voice at the exact moment when Edward was visibly cornered by a creditor. Then George Pemberton did exactly what I had predicted a man of his pride and limited intelligence would do. He raised his voice. "You gave me your word as a gentleman, Ashford. £4,000 by November, or I would make the matter public. It is November." The ballroom did not fall silent. It was too well-bred for that. But the quality of sound changed. Conversations became whispers. The orchestra continued playing, but no one danced. Every person in that room, with any social awareness, understood what they were witnessing. A gentleman being exposed as a fraud. Edward tried to laugh it off, tried to claim misunderstanding, but his face was flushed, his hands shaking. He looked around for support and found only averted eyes and closed expressions. The men who had called him friend that morning were already calculating the cost of association. I remained exactly where I was, near the Duke's party, my expression conveying nothing but quiet dignity. Lady Winterbourne approached me. "My dear Miss Ashford, I had no idea your brother's situation was so dire." "Nor did I, until very recently," I said softly. "I have tried to manage what I could, but a sister's influence only extends so far." "You poor child, and to learn of it in such a public manner." I allowed tears to gather in my eyes. Not difficult, given the years of genuine grief they represented. I confess I'm more concerned for our family's name than for my own comfort. But perhaps some good may come of this. Perhaps now Edward will be forced to face what he has become. It was a masterwork of performance. I appeared as the victim while ensuring that every witness understood the truth of Edward's character. By midnight, the story would be in every household that mattered. By morning, his name would be unspeakable in polite society. Edward left the ball within the hour, his face ashen. He did not look for me. He still had not realized I was the architect of his ruin. The aftermath unfolded, exactly as I had designed. The society column in the morning newspaper, written by Pemberton's uncle, mentioned unfortunate revelations regarding a certain gentleman's solvency in terms that left no doubt whom they meant. Invitations were withdrawn, credit was refused. The men Edward had called friends would not receive him. Within a week, his creditors began legal proceedings. The house and land were to be sold to satisfy debts. But here was where my preparation mattered most. I had spent those weeks not merely destroying Edward, but building an alternative. My $300 a year had come from our grandmother's trust, which was separate from the estate. With Margaret's help and the assistance of her solicitor, a man grateful because I had once nursed his wife through fever, I had established that the trust also included Mother's personal property, which Edward had no legal right to mortgage or sell. The pearl earrings he had stolen were returned to me by a pawnbroker I had traced them to, along with a statement of the transaction. More evidence of his character. More importantly, I had approached the Honorable Robert Cunningham, a widower of 63 who owned property adjacent to ours. He was eccentric, scholarly, more interested in his botanical studies than society. I had called on him weeks before with a proposal. If he were to purchase our estate when it came to auction, I would manage the property for him, as I had been doing unofficially for years. In exchange, I would have the use of 3 rooms in the house and a modest salary. He found the arrangement eminently practical. More than that, he found me sensible and well-read. We spent an afternoon discussing his work on ferns. He purchased the estate for less than half its value. Edward's mismanagement had destroyed its worth, and I remained in the only home I had ever known, but now in terms of my own making. Edward left England in December. I heard he went to Ireland, then the continent, moving between places where he might still borrow on the strength of ignorance. I received one letter from him, bitter and accusatory, claiming I had betrayed him. I burned it without response. By spring, I had a new life. I managed Mr. Cunningham's property and helped catalog his botanical collection. I had my own income from the arrangement, modest, but mine. I took tea with Margaret weekly. I was no longer invisible, no longer erased. Women sought my advice on estate management. I was known as someone who understood the practical realities that many in society preferred to ignore. The house felt different, lighter. The rooms I did not inhabit were opened for Mr. Cunningham's research and occasional scholarly visitors. The ones I kept were mine absolutely. I hung Mother's portrait in my sitting room. I wore her pearls when I wished. I walked the grounds at dawn, watching the estate that should have been Edward's become beautiful again under care that was finally appreciated. People sometimes asked me about my brother. I would say, with perfect honesty, that we were no longer in communication, that his choices had led him away from family, and that I prayed he would find wisdom wherever he was. I never spoke ill of him directly. I never needed to. The truth had done its work. The revenge I had taken was not one of rage or cruelty, though I do not claim to be free of those feelings. It was simpler and more complete than that. I had merely ensured that the world saw him as he truly was, and that I would not disappear with him into the darkness of his ruin. Now, 5 years later, I sit in the morning room where I first read that solicitor's letter, but the light falls differently. The windows have been cleaned, the curtains replaced. Mr. Cunningham is in his study, cataloging specimens. Later, we will have tea and discuss whether the ferns by the stream are the variety he suspects. Tomorrow, Margaret and her daughter will call, and we will plan a small, musical evening. I am 39 years old. I will never marry. I will never have the life that might have been mine in a different world, under different laws. But I have something better than the future that was stolen from me. I have the life I built from its ruins, deliberately and with full understanding of what it cost. Sometimes I wonder if Edward ever understood what truly happened, whether, in whatever corner of the world he inhabits now, he has realized that his invisible sister was the one who held all the power, that the woman he never troubled to see was the one who saw everything. I think he does not. Men like Edward never do. They believe in their own narratives too completely to recognize the stories others have been writing around them all along. But I know And that knowledge sits in my chest like an ember that will never quite cool, warming me through cold nights and uncertain mornings. I did not forgive him. I will never forgive him, but I no longer need to. Forgiveness is what you seek when the wrong is greater than your power to answer it. I answered it, and I am free.